Okay, now that we know a little bit about Maya, how to navigate and get around, we're going to take a look in this video how to make a very simple piece of geometry. We're just going to make a 3D primitive plane, and from there we're going to take that same image that we have for our model sheets, and then we're going to have that mapped to a piece of geometry, and I'm going to show you how to cut it out of that kind of sheet of paper that it's going to live on. Okay, so I'm going to open up the outliner. I'm going to go to Window, Outliner, and we've got our folder structure that I showed you how to make just by selecting objects and hitting Control G, and then you can name that. So I've got everything geo-wise in this one folder structure, and I've got this model that we learned how to take out of the Unreal Engine 4 and pull it in here, and I'm going to hide that thing. So anytime we want to hide something, the hotkey for that is Control H, and if you want to know where that command actually lives, you can go up to Display, and then you can do Show or Hide, and then you can do Hide Selection or Show Selection. The hotkeys for that, though, if you want to select this, you can hit Shift H to bring it back. So again, Control H hides, select something, and hit Shift H, and it brings it back. Okay, so I highly encourage you to learn the hotkeys and figure those out. So I'm going to go and we're going to create a polygon primitive plane. So we could click this button down here, but I like to go up and say create polygon primitives. I'm not a fan of this interactive creation, so that's turned off. And then we'll do plane, and we can do the option box for this so we can always see how it is that we're creating this thing. So width and the height on this, let's go ahead and just make this, we'll make this 20 by 20 and a division of 1 and 1. And we'll do the up axis, actually we'll do the axis, we'll do Z because we want it facing up this way. That way, able to create it, you can see Z runs this way, Y is up, and X goes in this direction. So we'll go ahead and hit apply, and you can see here's our plane. So again, just like any of the primitives, after it's created, we can always go back and we can change values on this thing. So what's the size of this plane that we have for the image planes? The scale on that was 12.63. So I'm just wondering with this, if we put this to 1 and changed our scale to 12, no, that's not going to give us that. Just going to see if there's any way to kind of match these values up. What I could do is just go to the front view, and then I could just scale this thing up until we're roughly about the size of this thing. So looks like it's close to 20. Right there like that. I'm going to put this down to 1, and then I'm going to come here, I'm going to scale it up. We've got 195.25 something. This doesn't have to be perfect, but I will try to get it just a little bit closer to the scale there, like that. So I'll just put it at 195.55, something like that. So again, it doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm just going to go right here, and we can move this up. So we can move the pivot point on this. We can just hit Insert, and we can move the pivot point anywhere we want. You can just click and drag. We've already looked at how we can move things with the manipulator. For the move manipulator, it's the same way whenever we're controlling where the pivot point goes. Now we can hold down, temporarily turn on snap to points just by holding down V. You can see that temporarily turns that on. And now we can just drag on this one axis, and we can drag down to the bottom of wherever one of these points are. If you drag in the middle thing here, you can actually snap it to corners like that. Let me undo that and undo that here. I'll just hold down V and then just snap to that bottom there, and then when I'm done I can hit Insert and it takes me out of that mode. Now since my grid is visible, I can actually snap to the grid. I can hold down X and temporarily snap to the grid. So I'm going to click and drag up. Sorry, just going to click and drag up while holding X right there, and that will give me I wonder if things are freaking out because I had this selected here. Like this. I don't know if it's because I had something highlighted over there or something wasn't going right. And my polyplane is where? I think that's actually a draw bug. Yep, so when I let go of it, it's just some kind of problem. And if you see the back side of this thing drawing black like that, I'm not liking that. I noticed in this version of Maya that we have to turn on double-sided lighting. So if you go under lighting and say two-sided lighting, that'll give me the behavior that I'm looking for. You're probably not looking for something that I'm looking for shading wise, but let's just go ahead and set that there. Alright, if we tap 6, we can see textures displayed on our model. And currently there's no texture, there's no anything with this model. We're going to go ahead and make a material for this and throw a texture on it. So let's go ahead and come up here and we'll go to Windows, and this is where Maya stores a lot of the different areas where you can get to different tool settings and things like that. We're going to go to Windows, Rendering Editors, and then go to the Hypershade. This is where we can set up materials and create materials. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and it's going to open up this Hypershade area. And this will just be some other area that you're going to have to learn, but we won't do too much in here. So you can see we've already got some shaders in here, some things that kind of came in with those FBX files from Unreal Engine 4. We're going to go ahead and just create a Lambert material, and that's probably one of the more simple materials. It doesn't have a whole lot of shading going on as far as specularity and stuff like that. It's just kind of a dull looking shader. And so you can see I clicked Lambert and it's got this in this working area, and it also puts it up in this area that shows me all the different materials that I have in the scene. I'll go ahead and double click on that to bring up the attribute editor, and then we'll just call this character stand-in. And you can leave it as Lambert, or you can do underscore MAT for matte material. It's up to you. So this is our material that we have, and if we want to assign it to the model, we can middle mouse drag that and drag it onto the model, or you can select it, select this model in the world, and right click on here and say assign material to selection. That's a possibility for you as well. So if I double click on this now, you should see that if we assigned it correctly, we should be able to change our color on this thing like that, and we should be able to see that thing update. So you can try that out. So you can see how we can change color. What we're actually going to do is map a texture to this thing. And the way that you map a texture to this is you just click this little checkered icon, and that brings up this dialog over here of different things that you can map to it. So there's a lot of different things that we could map to this thing, but we're going to map a texture file to it. So go ahead and click File, and then we'll give this a name in just a second. Let's go ahead and navigate to where our texture sits, and I want the version of this modeling template that we had for the front that had the alpha channel on it. I'm going to go ahead and hit open for that, and you can see it's already thrown this thing onto that polyplane that we have, if you see it selected there. So we middle mouse drag, holding down Alt in here, and this can pan things around. If you just click and drag, you can move this stuff around in here, and you can hold down Alt and right mouse click and drag up and down, and that's going to zoom in and out for this area. So you can see if we arrange these things the right way, it's got this 2D texture placement node on here, and if we open that thing up, we can change things like how many times that image repeats on that plane. So you can see it now, I got 4 times repeating on there on U and V as far as the direction goes. But we don't need to do anything with that. I just want to show you that's kind of what that node is and why it's sitting there. But this is our texture node, so I'm going to double click on that. Remember, we can always double click on that, bring up the attribute editor for that, and I'm just going to steal the name of the texture, and I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to put it in the file name and hit paste like that, and it'll automatically get rid of the .tga and put _tga. So I think it's really important that you keep your files very clean, organized, you name things, because you never know when someone else might have to take a look at your work and actually work on the stuff that you're working on. So just keep that in mind. So here's our texture piped into this. If you hover your cursor over this little arrow, it'll actually tell you what it is what's connected. So the out color of the texture is plugged into the actual color of this thing right in here, the color of this material. Okay, so let's take one last look at this material before we exit out of this thing. So you can see it's actually getting some shading from the world. If we tap 7, there's no lights in the scene, and that's why it goes dark. But if we go to create lights and just do a point light and move that thing forward, you can see now that that card actually interacts with the light that we have in the scene, and that's because we hit 7. So if we do 4, it's wireframe, 5 is shaded, 6 is with texture, and 7 is with lighting, like that. Okay, so you can see how the light's kind of interacting with that. If I hit Control A for the light, we'll just make this really apparent that there's something going on. So we'll make the light red, and now you can see how that thing is really having an effect on that polyplane there. Okay, so if we double click on this thing and we crank up the ambient color and just drag that to pure white like this, that's going to make it to where almost all the shading is coming from just the texture. If we do incandescence, that can turn it into just pure white like this. But if I crank this thing all the way up and I put it out of the lighting mode, I'm just going to kind of rearrange some of these things a little bit. So if I tap 4, and then 5, and then 6, you can see now I'm just showing you exactly what that thing is with the texture, because I've cranked up that ambience on there and we don't have any lights currently on. So if I drag that thing down, it's going to be a bit less, but if we crank that thing up, you can see it's lit a bit more. So that's just a quick rundown of setting up the material. Now what I'm going to do is go to the front view, and we'll just tap 5, then 6, and then we've got our guy here, and I'm going to move him roughly into the right position because I never set the height on this thing like that. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is actually cut this character out from this plane. So I'm going to build geometry around it so it's actually got some shape to it. Because if I select this right now, you see how everything's mapped to this thing. And the reason this is not drawing, we saved an alpha channel in Photoshop, that black and white image, and all those darker pixels in the alpha channel are actually telling it to draw transparent when we're here inside of Maya. But we can save on some of the drawing calls and some of the harder things that the computer has to do for drawing transparency. If we cut around this thing with our polys, if we do that, it kind of helps the computer out and speeds it up a little bit. So it's not a big deal inside of Maya, but anytime you're doing this process inside of a game engine, you definitely want to make sure you're going through this. So let's take a look at some different ways of cutting this thing out. So let's select our object. So I'm going to go ahead and select it here, and we're going to go to the modeling toolkit that they have inside of Maya. So go ahead and click this little icon right over here, and you can see it's going to give you a bunch of different tools that you can work with. We're going to use the multi-cut tool, and again, you can see that if we hovered our cursor over there, there's actually a video for that. So if you guys want to check that out, go ahead and do that. But you can see if we scroll down here, there's going to be different options that we can actually use on here. So we can tell it some things. Let's just get into actually using the tool itself first. So you can see as we hover our cursor over here, it automatically wants to snap to a vert or an edge. And in our case, we want to just go ahead and we can click and drag along an edge like this, and then we should be able to click a point in here like that, and I'm going to click another point here, maybe come here like this. I'm just going to give enough breathing room around the hand. We don't want to cut into the image at all. We just want to kind of outline it a little bit. So we're just adding these points here like that, And you can see if you click and drag on a point that's already been created, you can actually move that thing around. Okay, like that. And I'll make another point here, here, and here. And I'm just going to drag off to the edge real quick, like this. We can drag to the edge, or you can drag it all the way up here and it'll snap to that point. And now we can hit enter and it'll complete that tool. Now if we drag up into the modeling tool area, we could use this select tool within here, and we can just select this face, and now we can just hit backspace or delete, either one. You can see how it's actually deleted that piece of geometry away. If we tap 5, you can see we're actually cutting away that sheet of paper, as if we've taken some scissors and actually kind of cut into that thing. So I'll tap 6 again on here, and we'll keep going with this multi-cut tool. So again, you can start on an edge, click and drag anywhere you want on here. And if you get close to the edge here, you can see how it kind of just snaps to that point. I think it's snapping because of this snap steps. Maybe it's 10%. I don't know. Let's see if we put it at 90. No, that's not exactly what's happening there with that. If we hit backspace, we can get back to this original point. I'll put that back down to 10% here. So I'm going to click and drag out and keep outlining this thing. So I'm going to show you as we add these points, if you need to take one away, just hit backspace and it'll step back in the process. So no big deal for that. So we'll just keep going around here, and I'll do this rather quickly. Hit enter. We're going to go to selection, or we can tap Q. Remember, Q is the hotkey for selection on that. Hit delete on that, and then go back into the multi-cut tool. I'm going to click and drag from here, come about right there, and keep working my way around the model. Like this. And I'm almost finished here. And I'll just drag down to the very bottom, hit enter, and then tap Q, select this, hit delete, and we'll do the multi-cut tool one more time, and this time we'll just drag from here and then drag up like this and hit enter, hit Q, delete that, and then now we've got this sheet that we have that if we go back into object mode, so we're gonna go out of the modeling toolkit stuff. So there is a little icon on here to let you know if this thing's active or not, so it doesn't appear to be active. And then we can come up here to show or hide the channel box. So you see that there's these two tabs, and you can go from the modeling toolkit to just switching over to the channel box. I'm going to put on the selection tool and click on this, and I want to be in object mode. So remember, there's different ways that we can do that. We can tap F8, we can do that, or we can right click on this thing and say object mode, and you know you're in object mode whenever the object has the outline of green. So here's something else to kind of talk about now that we've got some history built up. So I'm not a huge fan of Maya's history just because I've seen it cause problems in the past. Like, you can change options over here with these inputs after some operation's been done, but I've seen that cause issues. So to get rid of this history and kind of flatten things down and just make it a flat object with no history, you want to go to edit and then go delete by type and then do history. So I use delete by history so much that you're going to want to get used to this keyboard shortcut command, and that's Alt plus Shift and D will delete history. So again, it's Alt, Shift, and D all at the same time. I'll hit undo, and you can see we'll bring that history back. Just select it. You have to be in object mode to delete history. Alt, Shift, D, and then your history is done. Now here's something else to note. When we took this polyplane, we scaled it up and we moved it. And we moved the pivot point as well. The pivot point's down at the bottom here. I actually want this thing, the pivot point, to sit right at the origin of the world. So if you remember from earlier in the video, we looked at hitting insert, and then now we can hold down X and temporarily turn on grid snapping, And then we'll move this center point here and actually snap right to the center of the grid, let go of X, and then hit insert, and we're back into that normal move mode. But we still have this translation and this scale information on our model, and we want to zero that stuff out. So if we ever move the model or scale it up or whatever, when we want to get it back into its original place and size, we'll just be able to type in 0, 0, 0 and then scale 1, 1, 1. So that'll make our life a lot easier. So to get those things zeroed out, we're going to go to Modify, Freeze Transformations, and let's look at the option box real quick. So you do have the option to freeze just translation, or just rotation, or just scale. Or you could do everything all at the same time. So if I hit apply, watch these values over here. I'll hit apply, and you can see it zeroes everything out and puts a scale of 1 and X, Y, and Z for me. So now, once that's done, I can click on my object and I can push it anywhere in the world, and I can rotate it. Oops, sorry, I did spacebar. I'm thinking Unreal Engine 4 here, controls. So I can rotate this thing any way I want, and I could scale this thing up to be this big giant monster guy. And if I ever need to get him back into his original place and original position, all we got to do is select this top one, hold down Shift, go down here to rotate, type 0, hit enter, and my scale, we'll do the same thing for that, but we'll put 1 for that, and now he's back into the original position. So we'll just call this little guy Pirate Board size or scale, sorry, scale ref. Okay, and I'm going to middle mouse drag it into the Geo folder like that. And since I created a light, just because I am very particular about my scenes and making sure everything's kind of organized, I'll go ahead and select the light and hit Control G and call this light, or lights, because I might have multiple lights in there. Okay, so I've called this scene, I'm just going to hit Control S, I've called this scene Pirate Model Cutout. And as I said, a good rule of thumb for practice of keeping your scenes clean, not only for yourself and everybody else, is before you exit out for the day or whatever and say you're done with this file, go to the space bar, and if I want to frame in on this object, I can frame on it from the front top side, and I've got my 3/4 view all kind of figured out and kind of nice looking like that. Okay, and I don't need, we've got our 1x1 cube. Go ahead and hide that and save this scene. And now this scene is done. So there's your first little introduction into, we've taken a 3D primitive and we've looked at how we can just make a really quick material, where the hypershade sits, how we can throw a texture on there, even tiling textures, but then also getting into our first real tool where we're manipulating geometry as far as taking some geometry away. The only other thing that I didn't really kind of explain to you what was going on, if we go to Windows, UV Texture Editor, and we take a look at the UVs, U and V is a direction, and that tells us location on a grid for where the pixels will actually sit on an image. Because think about the shirt that you're wearing or your pants. It's a three-dimensional object, but it started off as a 2D piece of cloth that was cut into a pattern and then sewn together. So when you look at UVs, we're definitely going to get into UVs a lot more, but just a little quick explanation for that is we have to take this three-dimensional object that we will eventually have, and we have to put it in a two-dimensional space so we can actually paint on that thing. So UVs are the process of taking that 2D object and putting it and pushing it into a flat two-dimensional space, just so we can get those textures on there. So if you're kind of curious as to how that magic was happening behind the scenes, that's really what's going on, is that there's actually U and V information on that model, and that's actually what holds the textures on there. So I'm just right-clicking on here and saying UV, and you might be able to get an idea once I start to move this thing. You can see how it's almost like a window into that texture. So I'm pushing that thing over like that now, and it's going to hit undo. But remember, our image had alpha all along here, so it's knocking out that background, and we've actually started off with a 2D plane that was perfectly mapped to the U and V area, and then when we cut things out, it knows to retain the spacing of these points that are on here, and so it just kind of basically knocks that thing out. So a good way of looking at it for the 2D plane perspective would be, you just got a piece of paper, and these coordinates let us take a sticker and kind of stick it on there, and then we take scissors and cut around it, kind of thing. Alright, so that should be enough for you guys to kind of think about for this this video here.